Hi everyone, it's Katie, and this is a bit of a viewer request and also a bit of an update to some videos I've done in the past. I've done some videos about the different editions of Rider Waite that I have, all of which are in front of you. And over the kind of course of uploading those two past videos, I've added to my little collection. And then also my most recent edition is my blue box, is a Blushing Fool. And so I've had a few questions about that, what that is, what it looks like. So I thought I would take the opportunity to kind of show off this deck, this lovely deck of mine, as well as kind of have a bit of a talk about what the differences are between these editions that I have. Now these bottom two, I'll talk about first so we can get them out of the way. These are the modern decks. This is the Pamela Colman Smith commemorative set edition of the Rider Waite, which is a lovely edition. It does look a lot darker when you put it up against these other decks, but on its own it's really it's a lovely deck. The cardstock's lovely and thick, and it's just a really usable and accessible deck, which makes it a wonderful choice. Then we have the standard yellow box by US Games, which is the modern one, which I bought in a shop not too long ago. It's very plasticky and very, very yellow. Yellow is certainly the way to describe this, I think. It's still a great study deck if you just want a cheap Rider Waite Smith to kind of have. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, there's plenty of people who do really like this edition. It's not my favorite. I think it's too shiny and too yellow, but that's just me. And now let's work our way backwards chronologically. This one of my kind of older decks would be the newest. This one is a UK distribution only deck that was published in the 90s, I believe. It is kind of cool. It's like this two-part deck. And this is quite easy to get, and it shouldn't cost you very much money. If you're paying I don't know, more than $50 and you're being ripped off, I would say. This does have the copyright, as you can see, but the colors are still not quite as bright and harsh as that newer Rider Waite I just showed you before. It's kind of a nice balance. It's not as papery as some of the older ones, but it's certainly not plasticky like the newer one. It's like a slick kind of finish. The lines are quite clear, the colors are quite nice. Like, I feel like this is a really good deck if you want a nicer, slightly older Rider Waite Smith and you don't mind the copyright. It's a great deck, and it's one that I actually use quite a bit. And the little box is a great, I don't know, everybody likes a nice tarot box. It did come with one blank card and then this one extra card. So these can kind of be used to help date the decks often. I'm not quite clever enough to do that, although I'm sure it would be easy enough. It's like, you know, if you know that this deck must have come out after these ones, which means that it can't be older than whatever's on here, sort of thing, which is a good little thing to know. The little white book has the world on the front, and Rider in London. So we'll leave the cards out for now because we might have a bit of a look later. This is my next one, which I think was published in the 80s. I found this at Savers for a couple of bucks. That's why, you know, it's got the sticky tape and whatever all over the box, but that's all right. This one was published, printed in Switzerland, which basically means that it has the nicer cardstock and nicer printing. But it was after US Games had moved to Stanford, and after they had placed their copyright on the cards. So this, I like to say, is kind of my in-between deck. It does have the copyright, but the paper the cards are even more matte than in the 90s edition. The colors are a little bit different, as you can see. The 90s edition is a little bit lighter. But in terms of like the line work, they're both very clear and easy to see. And all of these four decks have Pixie's hand lettering on the bottom rather than the computer type. So this is a really lovely deck, and another one that you shouldn't have to pay a whole lot of money for. Just check Whoever's listed it has the backing shown. It does have the barcode and stuff, which is kind of in the little R up the top, which does tell you that it's going to have the copyright on the cards, but it was still printed in Switzerland. So this one, you know, you don't have to spend a lot of money to get. You just got to kind of, if you're buying it online, you got to kind of check those details to make sure this is the one that you're getting. But the card stock is, I think, really lovely, and the printing. The little white book it comes with has the magician on the front, and it's kind of like a glossy book rather than a really papery one. And these are the details in here. This might seem silly to some of you, but this is all like technical stuff that collectors know. And this one also comes with one blank card, and then the second card looks like this. All right, now this is where we're starting to get to the fancier stuff. This is what's known as the Sunburnt Magician deck. I didn't really know that when I bought it. I just knew that it was printed in Switzerland, which means it's the nicer card stock. And that doesn't have the little R up the top like my newer one does. Doesn't have the R. And also the bottoms, this one's like a dark grey, whereas this one's like a lighter, almost, well, it really is white, isn't it? And then there's also some other differences on the front. We can even see the magician's face is very different. That's why this one is dubbed the Sunburnt Magician, which I think is quite funny because he looks very sunburnt. But that's kind of like the differences on the front of the box. And then, as we saw, this one doesn't have the barcode on the bottom like the other one does, and it's printed in Switzerland. Now this box is a little bit, it's not doing too bad, but it's not in the best of condition. But I think the cards are in pretty good nick, which is, I think, the important part. This is the little white book. It's much more similar to the 90s edition, actually. It's the paper with the world on the front, Rider and Company. And then for this one, there's just 2 blank cards. So this one, from, you know, what, I'm not like a super nerd, but I kind of have a general idea. This one would be published sometime in the 70s, and the cards, they look like they haven't ever been shuffled, or at least not properly shuffled. Like, you know, they don't have that feathering that old cards get. Like, they look like a fairly new deck. So if we were to compare the Sunburnt Magician with the 80s edition of the deck, we can see that there's quite a bit of a difference in terms of colour, and even the line work. The older deck, the 70s deck, no copyright, is quite a bit lighter and softer. And the line work's just slightly lighter, I think, especially you can tell in his clothing and things. But overall the card's just a lot lighter, I think would be the right word. Now if we go to the 90s edition, I think it's fairly similar, but the older one is a bit warmer, and also still a little softer. Like the blue in the mountains in the 70s edition is kind of more green in comparison to the 90s. But they're both lovely additions, and you can see why I really like this 90s one for what it is, because even though it's a little bit brighter, a little bit more yellow, it's pretty close. It's pretty close, especially considering how much cheaper this one is and easier to get than this one. Then if we were to compare it to the Centennial, as you can see, this one kind of, the Centennial looks quite murky when you put it up next to something like this, which is funny because I actually quite don't like the Centennial very much when I put it up next to a deck like this. This looks just so much fresher and cleaner. But on its own, I really enjoy the Centennial. But I think up next to a deck like this, you can really see just like how overly tea-stained it is. You'll also notice the face of the Fool. Like the colour is actually done differently. It's kind of done in lines in the Centennial, whereas the 70s yellow box Sunburnt Magician is just kind of a single block of colour for his skin. Then if we would go all the way to the modern day yellow box, you'll see there's quite a big difference. I think it's pretty clear why people like the older ones if they're really into using the Rider Waite, just because this one is really quite harsh. It's pretty intense. Whereas the older ones are just really beautiful, I think, in terms of their colour saturation. So the colour is really quite different in this newer yellow box. The lines are a lot harder in a lot of places. The details, especially like in his clothing, just really kind of end up getting lost because of the oversaturation and the heavier line work. And then of course we don't have Pixie's lovely writing on the bottom, and it is got a big copyright. I'm not super fussed by the copyright, like that's not the reason that I wanted the older decks specifically. That's why these two I think are great options if, you know, that little marking down the bottom doesn't super bother you. It's more the colouring, and then also I just find I'm a bit of a geek about comparing the different decks. So I think it's really interesting. And then to the blue box. Now there's a lot of different types of blue boxes. Mine obviously has the green wreath with the purple shawl. I did get the little book. Obviously the book is a little worse for wear, as is the box. It's still, you know, holding up, but you can definitely tell that it's older and worn. The book is just the key to the tarot, Rider Waite's, or Waite's I should say, little book that you can get pretty easily in different formats. But it's kind of cool that I got that along with the deck. And then we have the box. Now as I said, there's a few different blue boxes, and they will have slightly different details. So I'll just show you mine. More to add to the conversation, so we can, if anybody's a geek like me, we can discuss the differences if you have a similar deck or and it is a two-parter box, which is cool. And this one comes with just 2 blank cards, and this is very papery. It's really, really lovely in terms of the cardstock, I think. Like it's even more papery than the pre-copyright Sunburnt Magician. Like it's very, very, very matte. There's almost no slick to it, absolutely no gloss, as you can see. I hope you can. It's very, very matte. And unlike the other decks, the fool looks a little bit different. So this is what we mean when we say the blushing fool. He looks like he has a little bit of a rash. Poor old fool. Again, I'll just show you by comparison. This is our Sunburnt Magician. Very clean skin, blemish free. But this poor old fool, he's having a bit of a hard time. So this is the blushing fool, which is just a fancy way of saying that it's a bit of a defect in the printing, which didn't occur with very many decks. So it's more like a curio, like an interest to collectors. It doesn't necessarily mean anything super exciting. It's just, you know, how things, when they're often accidental things, when they're a bit rarer, they become collectible. So that's what people mean when they say the blushing fool. Now the magician is very much the same, but then it's also the high priestess, who also looks like she's, I don't know, been eating something that she's allergic to or having too much wine or something. But it's just a really lovely addition of the deck. The cardstock is really quite different even to, as I said, the 70s and 80s editions that I have, which just makes it really lovely to touch and hold. So I'll show you a bit of a comparison again. I think the fool's just the easiest often. So this is my blushing fool, obviously. This is the 70s edition. They're very similar in colour, but there is a slight difference. I think the blushing fool is slightly warmer or deeper. I'm not quite sure what the right word is for that, but there is a slight difference. And then, as I said, the paper, they're both very matte, but The Blushing Fool is ever so slightly even more matte, and perhaps slightly thicker in cardstock as well. I mean, it is hard to tell because obviously they've been used to differing degrees, although both of these decks are in pretty good condition in terms of the cards, I think. Now the Blushing Fool in my 80s deck, you can see there is a pretty stark difference. This is a lot yellower, a lot brighter, a lot more saturated. And then with the 90s deck, the Sunburnt Magician and this Blushing Fool are quite similar in their colours, but there is still some small differences. This is the Centennial compared to my Blushing Fool, and then the Blushing Fool compared to the modern yellow box. Now there are a couple of other cards that I think are helpful to have a look at. This is the Lover's card from the Blushing Fool, and the more I'm playing with these all together, the Blushing Fool cardstock is definitely, it's quite different even from the Sunburnt Magician. It is absolutely matte. Like there is not a single bit of gloss or shine on this deck. It might as well be a piece of cardboard, but it's smooth. It's still very, very smooth, but it absolutely is cardboard. And as you can see, the Lovers, isn't it pretty? The Sunburnt Magician, it's still very matte, but there is like a slight sheen. There's something just ever so slightly different about it. Not very much at all though, but you can still tell the difference. And then as far as the cards go, the Sunburnt Magician Lovers, which is the one on the right, is slightly brighter and more saturated in terms of the colour. I can especially tell it in the red of the wings and the yellow of the sun. And even the clouds, to me, the red in the clouds does look a little bit different. And even their skin, it's slightly lighter in the Blushing Fool deck than the Sunburnt Magician. And then compared to my 80s yellow box, which as you can see, it's still not glossy, but there's certainly a shine to it. And it's quite a lot brighter. Like the red of the wings is almost like a deep ruby red, and all of the other colours, you can certainly see that as well. The Lovers from my 90s UK distribution, again is quite bright, but it's less so than the 80s yellow box. And then our modern edition is really quite different. Another of the cards that people like to have a good look at, I think just because it tells the colour differences, is the Hermit. So this is my Blushing Fool. This is my Sunburnt Magician. You can see it's a little bit lighter, or a different, it's more of like a tealy green almost, like there's more of a yellow undertone. And also it's slightly more textured in terms of the colour, not in terms of the actual card, but the colour. This is definitely much more of just a one-tone colour. Then our Blushing Fool and our 80s yellow box. You can see the yellow box, the 80s yellow box, the colour is just a lot more saturated. And then our Blushing Fool and our 90s UK distribution is quite a bit lighter, and it maintains that kind of texture of the other decks, whereas the Blushing Fool deck doesn't have that so much, which is quite interesting. But it's certainly just got like a lighter colour to it, and it also kind of follows along with the slightly warmer tone to it as well. This is our Centennial, which kind of exaggerates that texture I was talking about in the other decks, and obviously has its distinct tea stain look. And then the very, very modern yellow box, which kind of just ups that warmer yellow tone underneath the background, but also brightens up the greys. I know this isn't of interest to everybody, but for those of us who are geeks about this, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any other questions about my decks, if you're trying to kind of date yours, and you think that it might fit somewhere in between this and knowing more about my decks might help, or if you're just curious, feel free to ask if I've missed any specifics that you want to know. I'll do my best to either get back to you or make another video if there's enough kind of questions or whatever for it. In terms of what my favorite decks are, I know that I've been asked that a lot. If you're talking about like the mass produced, I really do like the Centennial. I think it's a great addition. The cardstock's beautiful, and I really enjoy reading with it. It's one of my most used decks. It's just a great one to have, and knowing that it's so easily replaceable, you know, you don't really have to worry about it too much. It shuffles great. It's a great deck. In terms of these slightly older ones though, I of course love my Blushing Fool. I mean, it's a little bit exciting. I wasn't expecting it to be a Blushing Fool when I opened it up, but beyond that, I just really like the colors. And I love the cardstock. It's very matte, very cardboard sort of feel. And it does, as I said, have those softer colors, softer line work. Of these four, I think this kind of in-between deck from the 80s-ish is probably my least favorite. It's closest, I think, to the modern yellow box out of all of them, just because it does have that slightly brighter, more yellow kind of color to it. And still, I still prefer this over the modern one because it's not quite as intense, and the cardstock is slick but not glossy. So I still prefer it over the modern, but out of these four, it's probably my least favorite. In terms of like a good budget one, I seriously would just look for this one because it's very easy to tell it's this one. You know, it's got a very distinct box. It's pretty easy to get confused between, you know, these two if you just see the box online. I think this is a great one to look for because, you know, it's quite obvious what it is. It does have the copyright. It's a little bit slick, you know. I don't know if it's technically glossy. Maybe it is slightly, but it's not like gloss how we would call it today. I don't think that's glossy. So it's got a nice cardstock. It's not as thick or as matte as the older ones, but it's still a nice cardstock. The printing's done lovely. The colors are softer than this one here, but a little bit more colorful than these ones. So I think for the budget, this is a really great kind of middle ground, I think. And I really love it. It's one that I use a lot. I'll leave a link to a video Angelo Nasios did a little while ago where he kind of showed a couple of different yellow boxes and really went into depth about, you know, like the color of the title here and the different barcodes, and so it can kind of give you a bit of a better idea if you are looking for a yellow box what you might actually be getting. There's a lot of different editions that I don't have. These are just four, I mean only 2 yellow boxes and 1 blue box. There's more yellow, there's a lot more blue boxes. There's, you know, different colors, like there's one with the yellow shawl, Waddington specifically rather than Rider. Then there's more yellow boxes. You can get a Blushing Fool in a yellow box. So there's a lot more editions. These are just 4, but I'm pretty happy with my little collection. I feel like it covers a good range of the changes, which I find really interesting. It covers a good, you know, pretty good progression. I think they're pretty well spaced out, especially, you know, these kind of cover a few different decades. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you've watched to the end, I hope you found it interesting. As always, please feel free to leave any comments or questions below. I'll do my best to get back to you. I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm more just like an enthusiast. I find it interesting and I love geeking out about stuff. But if I've made any mistakes or you'd like to clarify anything, please leave that information below too, because I would happily learn more about the decks that I do own. But that is all from me for now. I hope you're well, and I will talk to you all again soon. Much love. Bye.